Okay, this is a big one. This is AQA GCC Geography, Paper 2, Changes Economic Development, essentially. This is looking at Malaysia, which is an NEE. The spec really wants you to cover lots of things in here. So location, significance, industrial structure, the role of transnational corporations, changing politics, international aid, environmental impacts, etc. So let's see what we can get on with. First of all, there is Malaysia, and Malaysia is right in the middle down here. And you can see that Malaysia, in terms of human development, very, very strong country, an Asian tiger, as they call it. But other weaker countries around it, which could, of course, take its manufacturing of various other things. Quite a lot to say. May have to do 2 videos in here. So first of all, 31 million people, third largest economy in East Asia. It's a mix of Malay, China, indigenous people. Socially, politically, the Malay, positive discrimination in the workplace, the Chinese are the wealthiest, and the Indians, the indigenous, are the poorest, okay, as is typical. Economics, it's a newly emerging economy, wealthy originally on natural resources, rubber, palm oil, timber, electronic goods. Since 1990, it's been growing very quickly, and the target is for the government by 2020 to be considered an HIC. So economic growth here, not by tourism, but by rapid industrialization, which means manufacturing taking over from primary exports. Little graphic, 1970, it was an LIC, it exported the things I've already mentioned, primary industry. By 1990s, it had now become begun to be an NEE, moving upwards in the development scale, and transnational corporations from overseas were bringing in and transplanting their manufacturing, secondary industry, the government assisting that. So beginning to have industrialization taking over from just extractive industries. And the final stage in the 2000s is, in fact, local TNCs, Malaysian TNCs, and tourism and services, so tertiary industries coming in. So primary in the 70s, secondary in the 90s from overseas companies, and then finally their own manufacturing and their own services, which actually did mean that they had to start putting the Malaysian manufacturing into another surrounding Asian country because things were getting too expensive in Malaysia. So how has it achieved this growth? Politically, the government invested in high-tech industries, microelectronics, IT, biotechnology. It encouraged, as I've mentioned a few times, foreign multinational companies or transnational companies to set up branch factories. It did this by low taxes and cheap land. Fine, and they had tough measures to keep wages low. So Malaysia wanted to be the least cost location for transnational corporations. So they came in there and they invested and they started providing jobs. And of course, once they start providing jobs, you get the multiplier effect because people are taxed, they start spending locally, and off we went. Third point, investment. Investment in education to try and skill up the Malaysian workers, because the Malaysian government realised that it may be manufacturing now because we've got cheap labour, but that could go somewhere else if costs rise. So it started to get a skilled labour force in there. And then they were able to build the infrastructure they needed, established a free trade zone so that people could come in and trade without having to pay tariffs. A tariff is a tax on imported goods. And they specifically focused on areas within Malaysia as industrial areas. So the island of Penang is a free trade area, and then a place called Cyberjaya, a new city completely dedicated, if you like, Malaysia's Silicon Valley for the next stage. And then finally, they stimulated the growth of their own transnational corporations that started manufacturing even outside, proton cars being an example. So that feeds into the economic reasons for how they did it. First of all, manufacturing industries, increasing the market share in world trade, because of course you've got large populations that are beginning to grow in terms of affluence in Southeast Asia, and the government wanted Malaysia to be the place where industries went to build things to sell and export to those countries. Social reasons, workers were prepared to work long hours for low pay. It's either that or subsistence. So they took advantage of the economy that was being grown by the political measures, and the people were willing to get involved. And then you've got this something called the Economic Transformation Program. Malaysians became richer. That means there was more market at home for goods, which means that people started in the more local economy, started manufacturing things to meet their local market, and that stimulated more employment, and off we went. So the role of transnational corporations in development, a bit like contrast with the role of tourism. Advantages. Inward investment gives a multiplier effect, which leads to infrastructure developing, for example, like water, sewage systems, roads, reliable electricity supply, really important stuff. Additionally, the Malaysian entrepreneurs were able to learn from the transplanted manufacturing. They could watch the manufacturing process, they could sit in on meetings. So gradually the Malaysian entrepreneurs will begin to see how industrialization was done. Increase in living standards brought in by the wealth, kind of obvious, and increase in globalization increased the number of contacts, which started to open up the society to more ideas and therefore started to become flexible rather than feeling Malaysian and we're only going to sell our rubber. No, we actually can do better things. Difficulties, leakage, where the profits of a transnational corporation go back to the home place. You can't control it. It's one of those things that has to happen because, of course, if you tax it, the company wouldn't have come there in the first place. They'd go to another country. So the countries are competing against each other. Early on, it stops local competition because the transnational corporations are able to have the economies of scale being big, and they were able to dominate the first tranche of manufacturing, which meant that local entrepreneurs who wanted to, let's say, start a car factory would never be able to compete with the established global brands coming in. Disadvantages, increased wages in Malaysia meant that many transnational corporations decided to go somewhere else. They've got no allegiance necessarily to Malaysia. You've got some details in here, you can get the resources, but the political positives, it became a founding member of ASEAN, which is a trading bloc for Asia. Very important, and also an APEC member. You can look it up if you like, but just need to know acronyms. It became a very significant, became a very significant political player. The negatives, the treatment of the minorities. The Chinese, Philippines, and Indonesians complained to the UN about what was going on. And in fact, the United Nations put pressure on the Malaysian government to recognise the rights of all parties in the population. And also then we had to dispute over oil. The seas around Southeast Asia are lots of countries have borders with them and they all try and claim the oil rights. So in terms of international aid played a part before and along with the growth of transnational corporations. Before Malaysia had its own money, it would rely on multilateral aid, coming from many countries to Malaysia, so the UN, for example, or the EU. Emergency aid, very little of it, but that's when you get NGOs coming in. Long-term development aid, so the World Bank, part of the United Nations, would lend money for the development of, for example, roads, charitable NGOs, and probably the worst thing is something called Tide Aid. And a good example in the 1990s, the UK said, look, we'll give you 234 million to build a very important HEP dam because we know you need electricity. However, you're going to buy our defence weapons, guns, rockets, aeroplanes. Okay, with massive environmental and social costs, people had to move from where the reservoir was being built behind the dam, and so on and so forth. So the effects on the quality of life socially. Higher levels of literacy, higher levels of education, doctors per thousand. There was only 0.7 doctor per thousand of the population in 2008. Only 7 years later, that had almost doubled. Really impressive. On the environment, clearly oil extraction and the pollution of the rivers, deforestation reduces biodiversity. Go and look at your tropical rainforest case study, the Choco rainforest, I think you'll find. Land clearance for palm oil, because that's a cash crop for exporting, and of course air pollution in the great growing industrial cities. The response, well, the government now had money to invest in sewage systems. They imported air quality laws that the EU had put in because they realised that if they didn't, then other TNCs coming to Malaysia would not locate there because their host country where they came from would object and people would not buy their products back in, say, Europe. Okay, there's a few questions. Real tough, quick sprint through. Have a look at the resource. There's a link just below the YouTube video.